Hi! Oh, do you see yourself? That's the puppy. Do you know who that is? That's you! Welcome back to the Scale Builders Guild. Thanks again for watching. Today we're taking a look at the RC4WD C2X, and I have done a ton of upgrades to this truck in past videos, a whole series in fact. This video is not really about upgrading the truck itself, but learning a new skill and trying something out and improving the overall looks and getting a few more scale points if you were to try to comp with the C2X from RC4WD. Ugh, I got some in my eye. So that subject today is brazing, and I've done a couple of videos here and there on brazing and what's required and what you need to have, and this is not something I would necessarily suggest to... It's a hair. It's like a very fine hair. Got it. It's not necessarily something I would consider to be a necessary or mandatory skill for tiny trucking, but it is certainly a skill that you will find to be very handy when you get into fabrication, making your own parts, and you want to test your skills and challenge yourself and add a whole new dimension to this hobby. Brazing is a great place to start. So I'm going to go over some of the basics of brazing today, and I'm going to show you some final results on the C2X. Brazing can give you a lot of really unique ways to make a truck your own and to add some strength and rigidity and scale points. So let's get right into it. I like to refer to brazing as a sort of cold welding. It's not TIG, it's not MIG, it's any of the more advanced ways of joining two pieces of metal together, but it is a process that works very well for the small diameter tubing that we're using in this hobby and the limited amount of heat that is required and investment. And that's one of the biggest things, especially right now. I don't really want to be spending a lot of money, so I wanted to use stuff I had on hand again. This was all stuff that I did have on hand. I had some 3/16 inch brake line, just straight stock brake line. It comes in many different kinds. Some are coated, some are uncoated. Whatever it is, if it is coated, you'll want to make sure to sand away as much of that as you can before you heat it up, because whatever fumes come off of this thing can be toxic. And speaking to the safety elements of all of these things, you should have some heavy duty gloves, eye protection, some sort of ventilator, or at least work outside, somewhere where there's plenty of airflow so you won't be breathing in any of these fumes. And if you are a child, you shouldn't be watching YouTube anyway, so this really shouldn't apply. But if you're a youth or somebody who doesn't have a lot of experience, try to have someone around that does know what they're doing. It's always handy. Another great thing to have is a fire extinguisher, because you just never know what you might set on fire. We're dealing with very hot gas, lots of open flames, and super molten hot metal. So, safety is key. In terms of things you will need, I'm using a MAP gas torch, which is just one of these guys here with one of these attachments. Stick that on there, and it's got a push start. So you don't need to have anything else. It's all just one piece. That's a welding magnet. Big magnet. Holds metal together. Just like that. You'll definitely want to have some of those. Maybe a good pair of vice grips as well. A nice surface you can work on that isn't your workbench or wood. To join all of these pieces of metal together, and this is I'm just using some 3/16 brake line. It's just, regular everyday tube. And not super rigid, but rigid enough. You'll definitely need some sort of tube bender. This I did get at Harbor Freight one year, and it supports multiple diameters of tube, as you can see there. And you just put a piece in. How does this go? You just put a piece in like this, clamp that down, and start bending. I'm not going to bend this because I want to use this later. You'll need some Stay-Silv brazing flux. You'll need some Safety Silv brazing wire. This is like a brazing alloy, 56% silver, so does a really good job. Not cheap, but what you need, or at least what I use, works really well. Just use a simple tube cutter like this one here. Put your tube in between the two plates there, then tighten it down, spin it around the tube, and then just do a flex cut, and comes right off. Two other tools that I do use, just a rat tail coping thing. It's like, you know, it's probably not what this is intended for, but I do use it to cope all of the ends of the tubes. And then just a simple everyday file. That's it. Those are all the tools I use for this. It's a pretty simple process. Once you've decided on your shape, and that's probably the hardest thing to do, and you've started to bend all your tube, I start to go for the largest, most structurally important joints first, and I apply a little bit of my brazing flux to both the tube that I've coped and to the tube I'm joining it to. Magnet, clamp it down, whatever works best for you, and then apply heat. And this is sort of where it kind of becomes less science and more art. You do have to kind of watch the joint. You will definitely see that brazing flux start to bubble and heat up, and eventually it'll get very, very shiny. At that point, apply your safety silv brazing rod or brazing wire, and a very, very light touch into that joint will actually make that flow all the way around wherever the flux is, and will seal up that joint very, very, very well. It's not a difficult process, but it is something that requires a lot of practice. I'm still not very good at it. The bending of tube and coping of tubes in order to get everything to kind of match up perfectly is still something that I struggle with. But for an amateur attempt at a full cage on the back of this C2X, I think we did a pretty decent job. I did use some metal fabricating tabs to make this build so much easier. I got these from Scale Metal Supplies on Instagram, and I'll be sure to put a link down below to where you can pick them up too. They come pre-laser cut on a sheet just like this, and you can see they're really easy to pop out because the lasers are really super amazing in terms of how well they can cut out of steel. This is pretty awesome. And there's a lot of different shapes and sizes on there, and it makes putting together a cage like this so much easier because these are your mounting points to the actual chassis of the truck. Yeah, so brazing itself isn't really difficult. It's knowing where to make all of your bends, knowing how to cope all these tubes together, and making everything kind of square and accurate so everything sits together properly, and to make sure that it's also symmetrical. That's probably the biggest challenge, is to make sure everything kind of squares up and looks proper. I wanted to give the C2X a pretty aggressive rear cage. I thought this was a great way to do it. I probably won't do too much else to it, except for sandblasting it, or media blasting it, and priming it and painting it. And then that whole cage will be done. I'm not going to do much to the bed. I'm not going to change anything in that regard. I think it's nice kind of leaving it open, and it kind of resembles what you might see on the trail. So yeah, that's, in a nutshell, that's brazing. I can't tell you enough. Just be careful. That's the most important step here, I think. And with practice and patience and enough time, you'll be able to come up with much better results than this even. It is definitely a great part of the hobby though, and something I highly recommend you trying. For the minimal investment that I made, I have done a ton of cage work like this. I've done bumpers front and rear, I've done sliders, I've done interior cages. There's all sorts of different applications for brazing, and because you're doing this in metal, you get so many more points on a comp truck than you would if you were using plastic existing parts. Another good piece of the puzzle there to getting your comp trucks ready to go and fully pointed out. Have you tried brazing before? What is your setup at home? Do you use the same sort of torch that I use, or are you using something a little more advanced? Put your comments down below. You know I love reading through them, and I try to answer as many of them as I can. And if you're enjoying this video, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so you get updates anytime there's a new video from the Scale Builders Guild. So we've got a few more things to do on the C2X. I'm going to be stripping and repainting this body. We also have to figure out a good way to get a servo winch mounted into this truck, and then I think we're going to be able to call it finished. So I do hope that you'll stick around for one final episode on the C2X. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.